Hello, my name is Yulia Zuban. I'm from the University of Stuttgart. I would like to welcome you to my presentation on yes-no questions by heritage speakers of Russian. Our study addresses the following research questions. Are intonation patterns of yes-no questions produced by Russian heritage speakers who live in the United States different from those living in Germany and those of monolingual Russian speakers? Heritage speakers are speakers who grew up with a language at home that was different from the language of the surrounding society. I will abbreviate the terms of heritage speakers, heritage language, and majority language through this presentation. Going back to the research questions, our study investigates whether yes-no questions produced by three aforementioned speaker groups are different regarding pitch accent placement, type, and final boundary tone. If yes-no questions are different, which differences can be observed? Can they be attributed to the influence of majority languages? And how they can be explained? Research on heritage intonation is quite scarce compared to other domains of heritage language grammar. Existing studies on heritage intonation come to different conclusions. That is, it has been shown that intonation of a majority language might influence a heritage language, and the other way around. It has also been found that the influence of a majority language and the heritage language can be bidirectional. The findings are interesting because they show that language influence in the area of intonation is multifaceted. Intonation of yes-no questions is a particularly interesting area since different languages show considerable morphosyntactic and phonological differences in how they express yes-no questions. Let's take a look at the languages in this study. Yes-no questions in Russian do not differ in their morphosyntax from declaratives, but this is not the case in English and German. Moreover, yes-no questions in Russian differ from those in English and German in terms of the nuclear pitch accent type and final boundary tone. If we compare the pitch contour of yes-no questions in Russian, English, and German, we will see that Russian differs from both other languages regarding the nuclear pitch accent, which is rising, and the final boundary tone, which is low. English and German, on the other hand, are reported to have a low nuclear accent and a high final boundary tone. Taking aforementioned findings on heritage intonation into account and differences among three languages under discussion, this study seeks to investigate whether there is influence of the majority languages on intonation of heritage Russian, and whether there are differences in yes-no question intonation and heritage Russian depending on the specific majority language. Now I would like to turn to our study. The data for the study were obtained within a larger study conducted by the research unit Emerging Grammars in Language Contact Situations that investigates the linguistic repertoires of heritage speakers of different languages in the United States and Germany. Three groups of participants have been recorded for our study: heritage speakers of Russian in the States, Germany, and Russian monolinguals. Here I present the results of 6 participants in every group. The data were collected in the Greater Washington area, Berlin, and St. Petersburg, respectively. All participants belong to the group of adolescents with the mean age between 16 and 17 years old. All participants had to fill out a background questionnaire, and we therefore know that all heritage speakers were exposed to Russian from birth and spoke Russian regularly with at least one family member. All heritage speakers in Germany additionally learned Russian as a foreign language at school. Some heritage speakers in the United States learned Russian in Sunday schools. Besides, all heritage speakers used Russian-speaking media. The stimuli for the current study consisted of 10 yes-no questions with different syntactic structure, namely subject-verb-object and subject-verb. You can see one example of a yes-no question used in the study for different conditions. Capital letters mark the lexically stressed syllables, and apostrophe marks palatalization in Russian. An SVO question that you see is «Кто-нибудь видел аварию?», which means «Did anyone see the accident?», and an SV question is «Мячик укатился?», which is «Did the ball roll away?». Yes-no questions asked about the events of a fictional car accident that the speakers had seen in the video before the study. 5 yes-no questions truthfully corresponded to what was shown in the video, while other 5 yes-no questions had to be corrected. The participants read every question that was presented to them in PowerPoint in Russian Cyrillic script. The participants had time to read every yes-no question, and they read it when they felt ready. A dialogue partner answered every question. The data were annotated for pitch accent placement, type, and final boundary tone within the auto-segmental metrical framework, using a phonetic and auditory approach for labeling intonation. All data were annotated by the author of this presentation, and 1/3 of the data was checked by the second author of this study. Presence of a pitch accent was identified by increased duration and a higher intensity of a stressed syllable. Decision about pitch accent type and final boundary tone was made based on examination of the local F0 changes, high and low turning points. There were 5 pitch accent types and 2 final boundary tones identified in the data. You can see them on the slide. All high tones could be additionally upstepped or downstepped in comparison to the preceding high tone. The software Prat was used to annotate the sound files. Let's take a look at the results of the study, and I will start with the final boundary tone. In the subject-verb-object questions, a low final boundary tone was the most frequent one for every speaker group. In the subject-verb questions, a low boundary tone was the most frequent one for heritage speakers in the States, but heritage speakers in Germany and monolinguals did not have a clear preference for either a high or a low boundary tone. Let's turn to the results regarding the distribution of pitch accents in 2 syntactic conditions. The tables show the distribution of pitch accents in % across 3 speaker groups. The maximum number of pitch accents was 30 for each constituent in each condition. We will start by looking at the pitch accents on verbs in SVO questions. Verbs received nearly the same number of pitch accents by every speaker group. As for the accent on object, heritage speakers of both groups placed significantly more accents than monolinguals. As for the subject accents, although we can see some numerical differences among all 3 groups, we find that only heritage speakers in Germany and monolinguals are statistically significantly different from each other. That is, heritage speakers in Germany place significantly more accents on subjects than monolinguals. Let's move to the subject-verb questions. As for the verbs, they were always accented by all speakers. As for the accents on the subject, again, only heritage speakers in Germany were found to produce statistically significantly more accents than the monolingual speakers. To sum up, we found that heritage speakers generally placed more pitch accents than monolinguals on subject and object. Finally, let's turn to the results of the nuclear pitch accent type across different speaker groups. The nuclear accent fell on the verb in both SVO and SV questions. In the SVO questions, the accent L* plus upstep H was the most frequent one for both heritage speaker groups. Monolinguals placed a similar pitch accent type frequently, namely a bitonal rising L* plus H, but it was not upstepped. In the SV questions, the nuclear accent is different for every group, but every group shows a bitonal rising accent. In contrast to monolinguals, heritage speakers again show preference for upstepped accents. To sum up, heritage speakers were found to place a rising bitonal nuclear accent that was similar to the monolinguals. However, heritage speakers differed from the monolingual speakers in terms of some phonetic features. That is, they showed upstepped accents that were infrequent in the monolingual data. On the next slide, you will see frequent pitch contours for SVO questions. Orange boxes here mark the nuclear pitch accent for every group. Heritage speakers of both groups look similar, showing a high prenuclear accent, a bitonal rising upstepped nuclear pitch accent, and a low boundary tone. Here is a short reminder on what was considered as an upstepped accent or as an upstepped boundary tone. Upstep was defined as pitch range expansion compared to a preceding high tone. As for the monolinguals, they demonstrate a low prenuclear pitch accent, a bitonal rising nuclear accent that is not upstepped, and a low final boundary tone. Let's take a look at the frequent contours in the SV questions. Orange boxes mark nuclear pitch accents together with the final boundary tone. We can see that heritage speakers of both groups show the upstepped nuclear accents, which is not the case in the monolingual group. As for the final boundary tones, heritage speakers in the States show a low boundary tone, whereas heritage speakers in Germany and monolinguals show an upstepped high boundary tone. So, how can these results be explained? The results of the final boundary tone in SV questions give valuable insights into the production of yes-no questions by both heritage speakers and monolinguals. Interestingly, and contrary to the literature, monolingual speakers did not have a clear preference for either a low or a high boundary tone in SV questions. Additionally, heritage speakers in Germany were similar to monolinguals in this respect. One could be led to think that heritage speakers in Germany might transfer the high boundary tone from German. But it doesn't seem to apply, since in subject-verb-object questions, heritage speakers in Germany did produce predominantly low boundary tones. Could it be anything else? Perhaps high boundary tones have to do with the language internal developments, rather than contact, since we found high boundary tones in the data of monolingual speakers as well. What about heritage speakers in the States who placed predominantly low boundary tones? Are they more conservative? It might be due to some community effects, meaning that the Russian-speaking community in Germany might be more dynamic than in the United States. For instance, if there are some changes in Russian in Russia that are currently taking place and are not on TV or on the internet yet, it might be easier to grasp these changes living in Germany than in the States, due to the proximity of Germany to Russia. For example, grandparents of heritage speakers may visit them in Germany more often than in the States. This is only a speculation for now, and more research and a greater number of participants might shed light on it. If we take a look at the higher number of pitch accents by heritage speakers on subjects and objects, one could say that the number of object accents could be explained by the potential transfer from the majority languages, since in both English and German, one would expect the nuclear accent to fall on the object. But what about the pre-nuclear subject accents by heritage speakers in Germany? They cannot be explained by transfer. Perhaps more pitch accents on subjects has to do with the linguistic insecurity of heritage speakers, or reduced fluency in Russian. In L2 research, a higher amount of exposure and frequency of use was often reported to play a role for attaining monolingual-like performance. However, according to the information from the background questionnaires, all heritage speakers of this study were exposed to Russian from birth and spoke it with at least one of their parents regularly. Besides, all heritage speakers used Russian-speaking media. So, the heritage speakers of the current study seem to be fluent in Russian, and this is why it's difficult to draw a parallel between the number of pitch accents they produced and their fluency in Russian. As for the nuclear upstepped accents, they possibly reflect an implementational difference. The upstepped accents presumably appeared in heritage speakers' productions because there was a pre-nuclear high-pitch accent in speech of heritage speakers. And so heritage speakers expanded their pitch range for the nuclear pitch accent, compared to the preceding high one. As for the monolingual speakers, the pre-nuclear high accent was infrequent in their productions. All in all, heritage speakers of both groups differed from the monolinguals with respect to the overall intonation contour. On the one hand, heritage speakers show the intonation pattern of yes-no questions that is close to the monolinguals, that is, rising bitonal nuclear pitch accent. On the other hand, heritage speakers of different groups differed regarding the final boundary tone in SV questions. Heritage speakers in the States showed low boundary tones, whereas heritage speakers in Germany patterned with the monolinguals, producing high and low boundary tones equally frequently. Heritage speakers differed from monolingual speakers in terms of some phonetic features, that is, upstep, and produced more pitch accents on different syntactic constituents. The results of this study regarding the high final boundary tone in SV questions cannot be explained by the transfer from majority languages. Neither can transfer from majority languages fully account for the higher number of pitch accents produced by heritage speakers. As for the upstep accents, it needs to be further investigated whether they refer to two different phonological categories or whether they are phonetic alternatives. Thank you for your attention. Your comments or questions are welcome. I can be reached at the email address listed on the first slide.